Did you hear that?
I did.
Yeah.
That's the first time I've ever heard that.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe it's because I'm actually recording to the computer. Usually I record to the computer. So we'll see. Interesting. Okay, well, let's pray. Father, we thank you for today, for the blessing of being able to share this time together. And God, we ask that you would help us to make the most of it. I thank you for the good things that are going on in our lives and our churches, Father, for the reports that we're hearing from vacation Bible schools and preparation for mission trips and camps and all the things that happen in the summer, the special opportunities we have. Father, we pray that you would guide us in this time today, that it would be a beneficial time, and that you would be honored in all of it. We pray that in Jesus' name.
Amen. Amen.
All right. What we're planning to do, and let me just tell you, I think most everybody here has probably been on one of these with me before, but just in case you haven't, when I do it from my office here in Decatur, it looks like I'm ignoring you and looking somewhere else. It's because my laptop is there with the camera on it, but the big screen is over here, and I can see better by looking at that. So at some point in time, I'll get a different camera that I can put on top of the big screen so it looks like I'm looking at you all the time. But I'll be sharing the screen enough for today that you're not going to see my face all that much. But let me just kind of tell you, because I think both for Carl and David, this is the first time you've been with us on one of these, even though you may have seen the previous recordings. But try to do some things just on a regular basis, on a monthly basis, to just kind of hit a particular topic or something that's upcoming or a tool or something that's practical and useful for our churches. And our idea was to kind of go back and forth between having someone come from outside the association that has a particular skill or expertise to make a presentation, and then some internal things. And we really were scheduled for someone on the outside for this month. The problem is with this particular week, I just couldn't find anybody. So, but again, it would give a good opportunity for some things that Dave and I, as association staff, have experienced over the last few months that we wanted to have an opportunity to share with our other churches. So we just decided to do that. And then I'll just give you a little heads up next month. The plan is that Dave and Patrick Hill, who's a pastor of Bethel and Nocona, will be sharing with us about community church projects, sharing partnerships with them. They'll talk about the Vacation Bible School they did together and some other things like that. And then in August, we have a social media specialist who's going to be with us, and I've actually been in a presentation with her before, and to just kind of share some really practical things that any church can do to connect outside, even within and also outside their congregation, using social media. And so she's really good, really engaging. I think currently she is the social media and marketing specialist for the state WMU organization. She used to work for Texas Baptist. So anyway, all that. What we're going to do today is look at a couple of things that Dave and I have both gone through. One is something called Communication Clarity for Teams. And we're going to begin with that one. I have had some interest in this for a while. Another association, Tarrant Baptist Association, which I used to pastor in Tarrant Association, and I'm good friends with all the staff there and do some things with them fairly regularly. And I knew that this was something that they were doing for their churches. So we had their director of leadership come out and walk our staff through this experience with the idea that it not only would benefit us as we work together, but also it would give us a tool that we could then make, do with our churches, a resource that we would make available. So I put together a little presentation on this. So I'm going to share the screen. Oh, I know that's not what I want to do. Let me try this. That will be a little, and that's what I want to do. Now, I'll share the screen. Okay. All right. Are you? Oh, I need to be at the beginning of that. That'd be awesome. I just opened it a while ago to make sure it works, and then all right. So here we go. Are you able to see that slide?
Yes.
And I'm going to try that like that. Okay. So are you seeing that? Okay. There's nothing else on your screen in the way?
Yes.
Okay. Because on my screen, since I'm the host, I'm seeing. I need to go back to there and stop that. Okay. So this is an overview of the process of communication clarity for teams. And as I'm sharing this with you, we'll kind of share some of what the benefits of it will be, how it will work, and actually it's very customizable for a church. So it's something that's particularly designed to help the church that you may be working with. So here's kind of the beginning questions to get us thinking about those kind of things. Do you find that your staff or leadership team members are not always on the same page? And I know that in our association we have a lot of single staff churches, and so perhaps a lot of pastors of those small single staff churches would say, I am the team. There could be some help for that too. Honestly, I think, and Dave, jump in anytime here if there's, don't wait for the end. But if there's something that I should say that I'm not, just go ahead and do that. But honestly, I think a couple of things. One is that one of the things that I want to make sure that we do is to help our single staff, bivocational pastors who may see themselves as the team, to say there are some ways that you can develop some help for you, and help put a team together. But even if you really are the one that everything goes through, I think some of this would even be helpful in that way. Dave, don't you think even just the self understanding?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the first part of it, which is made up of a number of assessments, just helping understand what your strengths are and what your tendencies are, and what your individual sort of propensities and the way that you think and the way that you operate, those are extremely helpful, just to understand not just but where not just where you're strong, but also where you're lacking, so that you know what kinds of people you need to surround yourself with. At least that's what I found.
Yeah. But I think sometimes too, even if you have a team identified, whether it's staff or whether it's deacon leadership, ministry leaders, whatever, but sometimes you're not clear, and everybody's not on the same page, and it sometimes feels like you're not even speaking the same language, and you may even be pulling in different directions. And so kind of the bottom line with this, and why you would even look into something like this, is maybe you just don't understand each other. There are some things that you don't understand about yourself. There's some things you don't understand about your team member. And if you can get clarity on that and begin to increase the trust you have in each other and increase the understanding you have in each other, it actually allows you to be more effective in moving forward, because you're not tripping over the communication all the time. So communication clarity for teams. That helped me a ton. Okay. Didn't make any difference to you, but it helped me to get your faces off of my screen that were covering up the words. So communication clarity for teams is a guided processing using the tools of assessments and then dialogue among the team and then group coaching by one of us, at least at this point, to help your team in a couple of ways. Why is it not going to the next slide? Of course. All right. First of all, it helps your team to gain knowledge of their own strengths, their giftedness, their preferences, as well as those of their team members. So just in the way that we did it here with our staff, and we chose a time because, I think everybody's aware that Dave came on our staff officially in January as our associate strategist. And so even though Dave and I have worked together in the association for the past 13 years, it's a little bit different to have him giving a couple of hours a week to the association as a staff member. And so it was good for us to look at myself and Dave and Amy and how we are going to best be able to work together, because this is kind of new territory for us. So a second thing is to gain a greater appreciation of how God has designed each person. It's one thing to know the differences, but it's the other thing to actually see those differences as benefits and say, this is it is good to have people with different strengths and skills and passions working together, and then to gain a greater insight of how each person's uniqueness contributes to the greater ministry effectiveness and focus on the mission of the church, or in our case, on the mission of the association. And that was a powerful tool and a powerful aha for us. So some different scenarios that we think this could be particularly effective for. One is similar to what we did. If you're onboarding a new staff member or a new team member, someone new in leadership, you have ordained a new deacon. I mean, you have selected a new elder. Whatever the makeup of your church is. But when you're onboarding somebody new into a team that's already been working together, what a great opportunity to get everybody focused on how we do this and how we make this new person a full member of the team, because we're walking through this process together. Another thing is, if you're refocusing on the church's mission, we've been kind of rolling along for a while. Everybody's doing their own thing. We are using this process for helping us to really get refocused on our mission. And then another thing I think is there's sometimes that we just look at and say, maybe it's time to review some of our policies and procedures and strategies. Maybe we look at dividing up some responsibilities based on our strengths rather than simply based on what the job title may be. So here's some things I asked each one of our staff members because we'll share this outside of just this meeting today, but just some testimonials for what our staff experienced. Amy said, I really enjoyed communication clarity for teams. It helped me not only learn how to communicate with others on my team, it also helped me learn about myself and how I communicate. I also love seeing how God made each of us with different strengths and placed us together perfectly. Now we know how we can use those strengths to the benefit of our team. This would feel weird to me to read with him listening. So, Dave, I'm going to let you do that.
Yeah, I'll read my testimonial. I've always been kind of an assessment junkie. I've always been quick to take advantage of those tools that can help me to understand myself better, my strengths and my weaknesses and my tendencies and my gifts. But the element of the communication clarity for teams that set it apart is that it takes each of those individual assessments for myself and others on our team, and it shows how my strengths and weaknesses and tendencies, how those fit with and then empower the mission of the team. So it helped me see how my unique shape fits in that puzzle with other uniquely shaped pieces. That was the big takeaway for me.
Yeah. And so for me, for the past 33 years, first as a pastor, and then at the association, I've been the guy who has kind of sat in the first chair, the lead person. And so I've been responsible for leading whatever staff or team there was. And I've always personally loved learning, and, kind of like Dave, being a bit of an assessment junkie, I've loved learning and taking every opportunity to grow and develop in my own life. And I also, even all the years I spent as a pastor in that, I wanted to facilitate that kind of atmosphere for my staff and team members, where everybody has a chance to grow and develop and bring their best. And I think I always kind of intuitively did that pretty well in terms of trying to create that atmosphere of trust and where everybody's developed. But I wish that, all those years I had been able to access tools like this. And I really would wish for every pastor to walk through a process like this, whether it's this exact thing or not, but with his staff or leadership team. So just kind of some logistics, how it works, what the process looks like in general. So conducted in or using the word retreat setting. I mean, the idea, it could be at the church. It could be, we'd be happy to host a church here in our conference room or at another site. But the idea is that the staff or the leadership team is going to be together in a quiet and uninterrupted setting for about 3 or 4 hours to walk through this process together. The assessments for whoever of us is leading the process, we need to have those assessments completed for all the team members at least 2 weeks in advance of that first session. So, if we were going to do this with a church, we try to get it scheduled, probably a month in advance, get all of the assessment information to all the members of the staff or the leadership team, and then make sure that we get those returned to us 2 weeks in advance so we can adequately prepare. And then we'd have that first session, about 3 or 4 hours, and walk the team through that. And then we want to allow about a month for people to process a little bit, to begin to make some application, put some things in place, see what changes they're making in the way that they work with each other, and then come back about a month later with another 2 to 3 hour session with the facilitator to kind of get some things finalized and established. And then, of course, we'll be available for any follow-up coaching as needed from now on. So just kind of a general thing. So what would the cost be? Well, for our churches, obviously, we're not going to charge anything for our services. It would simply be passing on the cost of the assessments. And depending on what assessments we use, I just kind of arbitrarily said this when I was putting this together yesterday, is that we would set a cutoff at $50. So if the assessments are going to cost more than $50 per person, then the association will pick up the rest of it. But more than likely, we're going to come in under that, depending on what assessments we use. But it's kind of set a cap. So you can say, okay, this is not going to go over $50 per person. But there is a little bit of cost just because we don't get the assessments for free.
And Jerry, if I could jump in, just to clarify, we keep throwing around this word assessment, and I don't know that, just to make sure that everybody understands what these are. These assessments are essentially surveys that you take where you answer questions about yourself. here are 4 things. Which of these 4 is most like you? Which one of these is least like you? You know, of these 2 things, which would you rather do? So there's not a right answer, a wrong answer. You're just answering these questions about, you know, what kind of person you are, how you think, what you prefer. If you've ever taken the Myers-Briggs assessment, that, you know, it's going to tell you whether you're introverted or extroverted, and whether you're sensing or feeling, and so it sort of breaks you down into those categories. And I think the assessments that we use, if you've ever taken the DISC assessment, that kind of puts you in one of 4, ranks you in 4 categories, sort of high to low, D, I, S, and C. The other assessments that we've used for this one were leading from your strengths, that just identifies some of these, you know, what your tendencies are in strengths and leadership. So just wanted to clarify in case there was a question about when we talk about assessments, what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a good that's a good clarification. Thanks for doing that. I live so much in the world of assessments that I sometimes forget that everybody else doesn't. And so the idea is that, and it's important to use the word assessment because it's not a test. And you know, sometimes I'll do things with groups or whatever, and they'll go, you know, that test where no, it's not a test. It's an assessment, and it is in many ways it's a self-assessment. So you know, we're not telling you, oh, this is good, this is bad. We're trying to help you identify some things about your personality, about your giftedness, about strengths that you may have, your personal preferences. So it's really you are assessing yourself, but you're assessing yourself with a tool that has been used by thousands of people, that has a good track record of being able to provide good data. So yeah, thanks for that, Dave. And then just one last thing, and then I'll stop the screen share for a minute. This is just, you know, if you have interest in it, then the best thing to do is just email the association, and then we'll go from there. You know, to get whatever we need. So I'm going to stop the share for a little bit and just kind of pause for a second before we move to the second tool of the day. And Dave, anything else you think of, or for Carl or David, are there questions that you have about anything that we've said today? Obviously, you know, we can talk with you personally about more detail, but just anything kind of initially that wasn't clear about the presentation. It's really the first time that I have done this with this process. So I want to make sure that we were clear. You know, one thing is to make sure in the future that I clarify assessments.
Well, I'll say this, and Jerry, you kind of mentioned it when you mentioned, you know, single staff pastors, those kind of things. I think even if you're a single staff pastor, you still have some sort of team. You still have people that you communicate with. I mean, even if it's, you know, a custodian, or somebody who runs your sound for you, or somebody who helps set up chairs, or, you know, other folks who sort of work alongside you in leadership. And so when we talk about teams, it's not necessarily just people with titles. It's anybody that you communicate with regularly that helps in the ministry of the church. So if there's somebody who helps with kids ministry, or VBS, or helps with youth ministry, or leads worship, or any of those, I think all of those would fit in that idea of team, because those are people that you communicate with regularly. And the whole idea of this tool is it helps you communicate clearly as teams. So you know how you might need to communicate something with one person might be different from how you would communicate something with another person, and how they communicate with you. It helps them understand that. So everybody's got some sort of team, even if it's, you know, a man and his wife. That might be your ministry team in a small context. But just to encourage you, to broaden that idea of who your team is.
Yeah, and that made me think as well that if we were doing this for a church, depending on the structure of the team, we might use some different assessments. I mean, if it was definitely a team of these are ministry staff, these are people that are heading up ministries. Well, there's some assessments that we might use that way because that's a little bit more crucial to operate that. But if it's people like, Dave even mentioned custodian or whatever, but if it's something that the main thing that we need to do is to be clear on how we communicate with each other to make sure that we are, not that we are doing the task before us. Then there's some assessments like the leading from your strengths assessment. That's pretty well an across the board kind of. Some things with spiritual gifts and other things like that are a little bit more ministry specific. So, yeah, and that's the good thing about this is that we have a number of things to choose from that will allow us to. Oh, any other questions? And Todd, I hope you can hear us, but you came out later. Just be aware that everything you missed before you got here is being recorded.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Anything else on that one? So again, just with any of these, if there's something that sparks an interest for you, you want to talk more about it, just email. And if you can just remember the association office, hba@harvestba.com. And then Amy will get that to us and we'll follow up from there. But that way you don't have to say, so who do I contact? You just go through the office, then we'll get it to the right place. And I think everybody on here has got my phone number, so that's okay too. And if you have Dave's phone number, you can call him, but I'm not giving it out. That was one of our biggest, biggest transitions in the association when we went from having Elaine as a full-time assistant to then going to 2 part-times and then going to 1 part-time. There were a lot of people that would call Elaine not during office hours and that kind of stuff. And she, there were a lot of things that she did that way. And we don't operate that way with our hourly office staff anymore. And so I don't share their phone numbers with anybody. All right. Well, then let's move on to our next. That's what I want to do there. Go for it.
Modern technology.
Gosh, I wonder how that's going to turn out now. It may end up being 2 separate recordings, but I'll put them together in one before we upload it. The share button and the recording button are right next to each other. So let me share the screen again, and we'll move to our next piece, and that is it's called the emergency. I got the same thing again. I looked through it to make sure it worked, and now I've got it open to the last page. Emergency transition management. And that kind of sounds like a crazy kind of deal. But let me talk about that a little bit. All right. Dave and I really recently went through a pretty extensive training that's got a number of tools in it. And I'll talk about that at the end of this presentation. But there was one tool that it just seems like, wow, this is something that is applicable to any pastor or church leader at any time. So, I need to open that as a slideshow. From there. Okay, good. All right. So let's go to emergency transition management. You'll see over here this Sherpa. This is the organization that we did our training with. Let's move on to there. So again, beginning with some questions. And the question is your church prepared for ministries and operations to continue when a member of the staff or leadership team has an unexpected extended illness or crisis? Or how about an unexpected resignation, retirement, or termination, or a sabbatical leave or other extended absence? And so the idea with this is the time to prepare for those kind of contingencies is before it actually happens. Because when those things happen, all of a sudden, hence the word emergency transition management, when you're in the middle of the emergency, sometimes you're scrambling, trying to figure out what to do, and you may not be thinking clearly depending on the nature of what's going on at the time. And so this is something that you can use in advance to say, okay, if this were to happen with this member of our team, then what are the necessary things that would need to take place? So the emergency transition management policy helps your church staff or leadership team proactively prepare for these contingencies through a template. And the template is that there are and I'll show you at the end, actually, there is a document that is editable that we would provide to you for you to use in this way. But it helps to think about, so what are some of those transitions that we might be facing? And there are really four that this addresses. One of them is, and of course you've been reading it on the screen while I'm talking and not heard anything I said, but the imminent temporary transition. And that is an unexpected transition that is quickly approaching, that is expected to have a short-term impact. So the idea is that there's something that's going to happen. We know a little bit in advance that it's going to happen, and it's expected that the staff person or the ministry leader will return to their position once the events, are resolved. So, I'm thinking about, and I was trying to think earlier, and I didn't write anything down. It's just kind of off the top of my head, but I'm thinking about, let's say somebody knows that they are going to be having a surgery that is going to have a recovery time that's going to have them out of pocket for a while. And so this could be one example of that. It wasn't something that got planned years in advance, but you did get a little bit of heads up, and the person is going to be unable to fulfill their responsibilities for a while, but it's expected that they're going to be back once the recovery time has passed. So that's one scenario. Then there is the imminent permanent transition, and that is an unexpected transition that's quickly approaching and is expected to have a lasting impact, and it's not expected that the staff person or ministry leader will return to his or her position. This could be the idea of somebody decides to retire or to resign, and there's a little bit of time. So that's the idea of it being imminent instead of immediate. So there's a little bit of time to work on something, but it's not a long time. And we're looking at what's going to happen because this person is not expected to return. The next is an immediate temporary transition, and that's an unexpected transition that just took place with an impact that's expected to be a short term. the example I used before is somebody that's got a surgery coming up. Well, maybe this is somebody that had a car wreck. And, it's not something that you have any opportunity to prepare for. We do think they're going to recover, but it's going to be a while before they come back, but it's expected that they are going to come back. And so what do you do in that scenario? And then an immediate permanent transition, something unexpected that just took place with lasting impact. It's not expected that the staff person, ministry leader is going to return. This could be a death, or it could be a termination. As much as we don't like to think about those kind of things, sometimes things happen and people get fired. And so it's something that you don't have any chance to prepare for in advance because it has happened. But it's going to have a lasting impact because that person is not going to return to the position. So for this template that we'd have for each of these kind of transition scenarios, each staff person or ministry leader, and the idea is that every person on the team is able to identify the primary functions of their ministry, to identify what the process would be for emergency backup procedures, for personnel, who's going to fill what roles, for the financial management, whatever is involved in the financial aspects of their particular ministry, to train who a person would fill in for them is going to be, and just what other considerations are necessary. This is kind of the bottom line. The idea is that you want to do some proactive planning in advance to minimize ministry disruption. So there are things that happen. There are unexpected things that happen. There are things that are planned, but not planned years in advance. But the idea is that the ministry doesn't shut down because nobody knows who is supposed to do what. So it's recommended that each staff person or ministry leader in every church have an emergency transition management. That should be ETM. I probably typed EMT for executive ministry team so often over the years that it is, but emergency transition management. So the emergency transition. So anyway, that's the idea. And I'll show you a sample of that in just a second. But the other thing that I wanted to share with you, the training that Dave and I have done, is that the emergency transition management tool is one tool that's a part of a larger succession or transition planning process. That Dave and I have both received training towards certification in being able to lead churches through this. And again, just like with the other thing, the process is customizable for each church, and it's built around 6 conversations. And I just want to share quickly what those conversations look like. They don't necessarily come in this order. Again, it's customizable. And what I really wanted to hit today was just to make you aware of these other pieces, and then to try to get the emergency transition management tool in your hands. So, but the 6 conversations, one of them is protecting organizational continuity. And that is in times of transition, whether they are, this is the case of not so much an emergency or a crisis thing that comes up in a hurry. This is, we're looking a little further out and we're recognizing that a transition is going to come. We've got a pastor or staff member that is going to retire, or we've got, sometimes we have, we have staff members or whatever occasionally that are seminary students. We kind of know coming in that when they graduate, they're probably going to be moving on to something else. So the idea is that there are some things that we do have a little bit more opportunity to plan about. And in the protecting the organizational continuity, this is identifying and addressing potential areas of disruption that could happen during a season of leadership transition. Another is a transition strategy management, and that is establishing a defined plan for how to project manage the strategic leadership transition process. So we've got one example is we've got a pastor who has announced 6 months from now I'm going to retire, or a year from now I'm going to retire. Well, do we just say, okay, we'll just roll along here for the next year and then try to figure out what to do once he's gone, or do we begin putting some things in process to help us plan for a good transition? And then communicating transition effectively. That is one thing that we know about any kind of transition in the church is that there is some worry that may happen. There is some uncertainty that may happen. So how do we plan in advance to communicate in such a way that our church members have confidence in this process that we're moving into, in this transition, and they continue their investment into the ministry. And investment is not simply they keep giving their offerings, but they continue to be engaged and invested in the ministry of the church, and not let the uncertainty of a transition cause them to say, well, we'll just wait and see what happens, see if we're going to bail on this. And then emergency transition management, which is what we're specifically talking about today, writing a transition policy that guides the preparation for and response to an unplanned transition. And then another piece of this is new leader hiring. And that is something that I have been doing with churches ever since I've been here. I didn't have this tool, which actually I think will help that, but I've been working with churches when they're without a pastor, and helping to do training with their pastor search teams or whatever it would be. But these are some other things that could help with that, and especially in the case of if we know someone's going to be retiring, we can already begin the process of how we're going to look for the next person, all those other things that goes all the way into bringing that next person on board at whatever the time is. And then one piece that I think is so often left, and that is the proactive exit planning. And that is helping a leader that's transitioning out and their spouse to prepare for what's next. And rather than saying, see ya, that we've actually, that we're actually helping them to think through that clearly, and that the church is able to help them along their way as they transition out of their current leadership position. So again, contact the office to get the sample policy, which I'm about to show you in just a second, or to schedule a conversation with me or Dave about a more in-depth planning process. So let me close that, stop sharing that screen, and then I want to just show you really quickly what the sample policy looks like. And this is just simply a document that we would provide to you for you to use with your leaders. And so it's the emergency transition management, it's a sample policy. And so what you have is that, each person that's on your leadership team or your staff, you put the name of your church here. So all these places where it says insert, that's the editable part. And so it kind of gives you something. Now, obviously you can do more editing than that because it's simply a Word document that can be edited. But what they've given you is something where you don't have to recreate the wheel. That it kind of gives you the rationale and the functions and those other kind of things. And you really can use it as it is and simply go in and insert the name of the church, insert the position, insert the name of the individuals, who you got a case of board, elders, personnel team, whatever, who this person answers to, the emergency backup succession plan. It's got those definitions of what kind of transition we're talking about, and then it's got some particular ways that those would be addressed as the different types of is the different types of transitions. So to really walk through, I just wanted to show you what it looked like, and so you really could go in and make fairly minimal changes just by putting the specifics of the names of positions, things in there, or you could edit more than that. But the idea is that you don't have to come up with something from scratch. So that was fast and furious. Again, let me toss it over to Dave and say, Dave, what have I left out in terms of presenting that? And then anybody got any questions about that? And then go from there.
Yeah, I think you covered everything well. Just a plug. In the same way that I, as a husband and father, would want to take great steps to make sure that my family were left provided for if something were to happen to me, I think as pastors, we should have that same heart for our church, that it shouldn't be just the idea, well, it's their problem to deal with, when we can actually take steps and fairly simple steps on the front end to just make sure that our church is provided for should anything happen to us. And so I think there is a sense of importance and even responsibility and obligation for us as pastors, and I speak as a pastor, to do everything that I can to make sure that my church is taken care of if something happens to me, even if it's just something temporary, that the ministry is not interrupted, that everything keeps rolling along. And I think that emergency transition management is a good first step. And then, of course, there are those other conversations that might be helpful, at some point to look at, what happens if the time comes that I do transition out, how to guide my church through that, how to guide them through that in a good, healthy way. So I think that emergency transition management is a good first tool. And then after or as you're going through that, maybe that gives you the opportunity to think about these other 5 conversations and which ones of them might be helpful for your church to think through.
One of the things that in the 20 years that I was a pastor, I pastored 2 churches. One for a little over 2 years, then one for a little over 17 years. But the one thing that I discovered in both scenarios was that I came into a church and had to figure out how things worked. I had to learn where, who the vendors were. I had to learn what the processes were. And in neither of those scenarios did I have very much help with that. The first pastor I followed was asked to resign. The second pastor I followed died. And so the thing that I wanted to make sure that I did before I left both of those churches was I put together a document, a packet with those kind of things so that the next person was not starting from scratch and trying to figure things out. And the next person would have something to look at that says, this is the way that they're done things, and this is who you call for this, and those kind of things. So in a sense that, and actually, because really neither of those scenarios did I know very far in advance that I was going to be doing. And so it really is kind of an example of the emergency transition management. It was just it wasn't the immediate, it was the imminent. I knew a little bit ahead of time, so it gave me a chance to do that. But, it's really had I been able to do that ahead of time, I wouldn't have had such pressure to try to get it put together quite so quickly. But then some of the other conversations, just there are things that I already began thinking about. I turned 60 this year. I don't know what's ahead, but I'm already thinking about, what kind of position do I want to leave the association in when the time comes that I go, whether it is to retire, whether it is to relocate, whether it is, an emergency, but to be able to think in terms of those kind of things. So, and I think that's part of my responsibility in the current role, but I think it's also the responsibility of a pastor to say, if I am going to shepherd this congregation up until the point where I am no longer going to be here, and then I'm going to not shepherd them to prepare for that. That seems kind of a sad way to operate, rather than to say, I want to shepherd them to prepare for that as much as possible, and then to be able to know how we're going to pass this thing along and help that to work. And so there are other things that we will share related to that along the way. The main thing that we wanted to hit today was the idea of the immediate applicability of the emergency transition management, because anything could happen to any of us before today is over. And so, and without any sort of preparation, then we are leaving our churches, or in my case, the association, but we're leaving them with no sense of guidance, and no sense of preparation. And it, as I said, I followed a pastor who died, and he didn't have a chance to prepare them for anything because he dropped dead of a heart attack at church on Sunday. And so, if there are some things that could have been put in place where some people had some idea of how things were to be done, wouldn't have been nearly such a time of anxiety for everybody. So our time is just about up. We've got about 5 minutes left before our commitment to cut off. But any questions that anybody has before we sign off for today?
No.
If not question, then just comment or responses, anything that maybe made you think of that you hadn't thought of before today, or any way that you might help us as we continue to be able to share the various tools that we have. Is there something that we can do better in terms of communicating?
Couldn't think of anything.
Well, Dave, I'm going to say that we just heard that we are perfect, and couldn't have done it any better.
That's my takeaway.
That's what I'm taking away from this. So let me encourage you guys that are on here, and I'll just say this to anybody who watches this recording later. Again, hba@harvestba.com. And if you'll send an email to that and request any information about any of this stuff, then we will get it to you. And, we want to be able to help our churches to be as effective as they possibly can for the sake of the kingdom. We talk about our mission of helping churches explore their purpose and live out their unfolding story. Well, being able to do that well is something that we don't want to get disrupted by something that is either unexpected in the case of the emergency transition management, or not doing it well because our leadership team is not communicating well with each other. And we're getting bogged down and pulling in separate directions rather than really being able to fully engage and embrace and live into the story that God has invited us into. So anything that we can do to help along the way, we want to be able to do that. And thank you for your time today. And next month, as I said at the beginning, Dave and Patrick Hill will be sharing with us about some working together among churches in the community. Then the month after that, we'll be talking about social media, have a social media specialist that'll be sharing some stuff with us. And I think the month after that, we're going to be, we'll have had the association joint mission trip experience this summer that several churches are participating together on. We'll be able to share kind of how that went, some lessons learned, and also the idea is that we'll begin to promote dates and things for going back again next year. We're hoping this is going to be at least a 2 to 3 year something that we're going to be able to do together in this location. So that's kind of the plan for the next little bit. There is hell, let me just see if I can grab it, pull it up right quick. No, I don't have it here. There's a website, there's a page on our website with information about mission trip, also information about all these training things. I think that's harvestba.org/TTT, I believe is what that is. But I will be sure whenever I post this video on our YouTube channel, I'll put a caption on there and put in the description things, the different links for information. So thanks again. It's